Hey folks, Dave Nadig, Financial Futurist here at Vettafi. Quick video I did with Father Michael Tuck, priest of the Episcopal Church here in Western Massachusetts. A good friend. We did this as a camera test, talking about finding meaning in life, some of the things we may have learned from the pandemic, and things we can learn about building communities going forward. Seems appropriate for Memorial Day. Cheers. Michael, I wanted to talk to you because I've done a lot of thinking lately about what it means to have meaning in life. This is a topic that, believe it or not, comes up in financial services all the freaking time, because you have all of these rich people who get all of this wealth and power and then realize they're utterly miserable in their lives. So from your perspective, looking at the modern world, post-pandemic, social unrest, all the things we know are real in the world, what does it mean to have a meaningful life in 2023?
You know, what I sort of stumble into a lot with these sorts of wider questions is like just kind of whole category errors. And you know, I think you were even alluding to one in terms of your work with folks in the sort of the financial world. That you know, what we've done is we've reduced kind of the only scorecard down to money. And so, you know, it's worked great as like a proxy for value. But you know, you see it sometimes when you see those like articles about, you know, how much would a housewife earn if you had to outsource all those things. So, but can you really reduce that relationship or that thing to that value? And so again, you see the category error. So like, you know, when you look at, and I think that's where to me, you begin to dig into where's the real meaning found. And it comes in things that are not scoreable and things that are you know, harder to pin down. Things like relationships, and I think that's where a lot of folks really end up finding that meaning is in the way those relationships are formed and created and maintained.
What was your experience during the pandemic then? Because, you know, we all became isolated in some version or another. Obviously, you and I worked a little bit together here at the church trying to sort of figure out how to create a sense of connection, relationship, and community in a time when we're all supposed to be in our little boxes not seeing each other. Has that changed your thoughts about what relationship means?
Well, I think it's put a lot of pressure on you know, to take kind of relationship up to the next layer. That I would say that's community, and I think that the pandemic exposed all sorts of issues. Well, exposed issues and fractures in terms of how we understand community, but also really degraded our ability. Our ability in American society to kind of have meaningful community was already, if not gone, you know, almost going. And then the pandemic just put a stake through the heart of it. You know, and lots of things that I think in kind of previous generations that that were the building blocks of those kinds of community have also gone away. And I want to be really kind of clear about this because I don't actually, because a lot about this is good. It's had the knock-on effect of damaging community forming.
Tell me about that. What's the good part? What are we getting for what we're paying?
Oh, okay. So what I mean is in the past we did things like nobody worked on Sunday mornings so that all the good Christians could go to church, and that helped form community. And it's a good thing that we don't have that expectation that people
that everybody has to, right? That nobody can work on Sunday, right?
Right. But I'll kind of use this with a small s. The loss of any time of common Sabbath has been incredibly destructive to the ability to form community. So you know, I think the pandemic just kind of crushed all of that, and we were able to kind of wallpaper over community prior to the pandemic with various things, but like, you know, if you remember the whole thing about who's an essential worker, and suddenly all these folks who were working really low-level jobs that were kind of looked down upon by society are suddenly essential. And like all that has now been forgotten. It's, you know, it's back to sort of, you know, overlooking the role that they play. But if we cast our minds back, it's like, oh my God, where are we going to get our food from? You know, we need these folks to be doing this. And so, you know, I think the pandemic, I think, pushed a really powerful sense of isolation. And the word that I just keep coming back to, which it predates the pandemic, but accelerated through that process, is atomization. that we've just become these sort of just single free floating pieces. And that's an incredibly depressing place to be. It's the antithesis of meaning. In fact, like if you look at a lot of kind of classical definitions of what hell is complete and utter isolation. And the opposite of that, heaven, is complete and utter communion.
Well, and we talk about the mystical experience of being one with everything, right? The ultimate community. You've used that phrase before, that hell is like complete segregation from God. It's not literally standing in the burning place next to the devil. It's the detachment from any sense of the divine or the greater or the mystic, depending on what tradition you might be in.
Exactly.
So you've obviously been doing a lot of thinking about this. What do we do about this? Like, as a society, I observe the slow erosion of all the institutions that we used to rely on to bring people together to do good things, whether that was simply to have community and meaning in life, or to do a piece of science, or to govern a country, or whatever. Those institutions seem to be in decay. How do we rebuild from the ground up?
First of all, I wish I knew. I think it's well, and this is sort of what theoretically clergy are called to sort of live in hope, and so I kind of try to hold on to hope. But it's real hard looking. It's kind of depressing, and I think I'm not sure we're at rock bottom yet. And the only thing that I can sort of say with any certainty is that I don't know what it's going to look like. And I think, and I get this kind of question as a clergy critter, but like there's so many factors at play. The economics, the sociology, the politics, the headwinds for an institution like a little parish church are just crushing. So I could just sort of tell you what I'm hoping to do with this parish in the next 2 years. So, again, I mentioned that Sunday morning is no longer, kind of sacred. And I look at my congregation, and, the folks who come here fall predominantly into two categories. It's either folks who are retired or school teachers. And those are two groups of people who still have Sunday morning protected. They can come on Sunday morning. But, the folks that work at Stop and Shop, the folks that, even my own wife has to go to the early service because she works on Sundays, because she works in retail. So, what are we doing to actually reach out and try to form community among these people that have been atomized? And they're not going to be able to come on Sunday morning because they're working, or their kids got to go to traveling team soccer. And we've been so sort of ingrained that, if my kid's going to be successful, they've got to be on the traveling team so they can put the thing down on the resume, so they can get the good collar, so they can get the good car, like all that stuff. So I don't begrudge or judge those parents who are making that decision, because that's a real decision. So the way I'm figuring is what I've got to do is create a lot of opportunities in a lot of different spaces. And then it's almost like a kind of a warp and weft. So I've got to create one experience going this way and another set of experiences going this way. And hopefully each individual or each family or whoever it is will pick up two of them. And that way that'll bring them into contact with different groups. And it's all sort of within the context primarily of creating a space for people to have a conversation. That's it. That's my whole goal. So when I'm running, like when we did the Evensong on Sunday, yes, that was a good thing in and of itself. It was a great experience. It was also a lovely, peculiar act of worship, but it was the reception. And my hope is, and it's not even just the reception, but later on, next fall, when we do another one, somebody's going to say, "Oh, did you go to that Evensong?" And so I'm giving them reasons. I'm giving people reasons to talk to each other that they wouldn't have had before.
Is there a way to get people to commit and take that uncomfortable step of talking to somebody they don't really know in a way that helps bring that together? Is there a model for that in the church, of creating that kind of one-on-one connection between parishioners, not between clergy and lay people? It's
hard because of the nature of the buy-in, because because we've ended up in a space where the personal expression of religion is deeply individual and personal. So I mean, I think as the popular literature around loneliness and the work of the Surgeon General kind of continues, I think there could be an opening for me to say, hey, like, do you guys actually want to try something bananas? And to produce something like that, and just, I could just go down and take the 20 people that sign up and match them up with just people that wouldn't ordinarily talk to each other. And then the next piece is going to be, well, what are we going to talk about? And
Right.
maybe you have to seed that or not, or within the clergy, we actually did the same thing within the diocesan clericus, because what we realized is that there was 30% turnover among the clergy of the diocese during the pandemic, so we didn't know each other. And even more importantly, like, the new people didn't know the norms, didn't know how we were supposed to behave. And this is a great diocese to work in. And so we needed to teach these people that. And so it was with the creation of artificially constructed tables. And so every time you have a group meeting, you sit with your same table. And again, all it is just coffee, and it's the space in between the presentation. Occasionally, the presentation might ask for small group work or something like that, but it was just that artificially constructed group, and the sort of the kind of foment that comes from that, which interestingly is how the House of Bishops has been organized for the last 15 years.
When I think back on my own pandemic experience, and certainly talking to plenty of other folks, there is almost a sense of longing from just for pieces of it. I mean, I think we all know it was a holistically horrible experience that none of us ever want to go through again. But I've talked to so many people for whom there are pieces that showed them things about life that they could live that they weren't living. Whether it was they got outside more, they spent more time with their kids, they spent more time with their pets, they had family dinners again, whatever it was. In my case, my kids came home for a year. That was amazing. I would never have gotten to spend a year with my grown children at their age. They'd be out and gone. And I wonder whether this is one of those things that we have some institutional learning that happened. And we need to figure out how to take that forward. I wonder how we institutionalize that. Have you read, is there work being done here that I mean, you're a huge consumer of philosophy and reading and all this stuff. Is this a part of the world where you're seeing stuff done, or does this still feel pretty green field?
Pretty new. I kind of want to go back to sort of a challenging moment in the pandemic for the church. Because I think it shows, at least from the institution I'm playing in, sort of how far we are away from kind of wrestling with that. And it had to do with how do you do Holy Communion? How do you do this sort of central rite? And I mean, at least within the Episcopal Church, I think a whole bunch of things were exposed. One was a very sort of insufficient and anemic theology of what was going on there. Because what had happened is we had developed this very robust theology around what happens when we gather together in a place. And that was the one thing you couldn't do.
Right.
And so everyone's like, oh my God, what do we do? And there are other theologies of the Eucharist that are out there, like theology of the mystical sacrifice, theology of the communion of saints, all these other sorts of things. But we were relying really heavily on what I was calling, or what I call the gathering of God's people. So in the specific place. And so there was a big push to do communion over Zoom. And it's like, okay, so you get your own bread and your own wine, and I'm the priest, and I say the words, and then that becomes the body and blood of Christ. The bishops just said, no, absolutely not. And actually the Diocese of Western Massachusetts was, strangely, a real leader in this, in part because of the deans, because we were wrestling with all this stuff. And one of the folks who was in that meeting managed to get 3 pretty serious theologians to come and talk about this. 2 were professors of liturgics at seminaries, and one was this up-and-coming high flyer who was a senior at Harvard. And he had written an article that caused a big splash, saying he was advocating for Zoom communion. Well, we got them all together, and I boiled down these arguments, and one person was basically said, this is really hard. I don't know what to do. And another person said, this is really hard. We should just wait it out. And then the third person said, this is really hard. We should do something. And that was it. And then where I ended up with was this, I came back to this question, can you do communion over Zoom? And the answer that I ended up with is not yet. Because there wasn't consensus that was a real community.
Right.
And I've started doing some work with some younger folks and the kinds of communities that they formed over social media, which are these, to my mind, kind of bizarre, complex, I hesitate to use the word hybrid, but sort of intermingled. It's not even the remote, because remote's the wrong word, because to these folks, those relationships are very immediate and intimate.
Right.
They're
just non-corporeal most of the time.
Most of the time, but not
always.
Not always. So you have this friend group that emerges out of a combination of Facebook and then it turns into, I need a place to stay for a month, and somebody that you've never met before is suddenly crashing into your couch for a month.
Right.
So you can't tell me that real community wasn't formed.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all had those experiences. We played games quite often over Zoom. I had a long-running D&D campaign with folks that I really only knew from Twitter. I think that's a story I've heard over and over again. What's been a little dismaying to see is how quickly those evaporated. Like the ones that were real and the ones that were of convenience for the pandemic, you can really, it was pretty obvious when people started moving on in that moving on phase. The folks that continued to show up for the weekly, Jackbox night or something like that, and those that really just were like, no, I can go outside now. I'm never doing this again.
But there's something about some of those things and experiences were more effective in those like online platforms. Or equally effective, or they kind of scratch a different itch. So, and then we're seeing, actually, in the church, we're seeing this in a couple of places. Like, if we're as terrible as Holy Communion is over Zoom, because it really doesn't work right. If you're watching remotely, it just doesn't. You need to have incredibly high production values. It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. And we're still doing it for people that can't come out. But morning prayer is really effective over Zoom. And I think we ended up coming up with a really good solution. And what we ended up doing is there's only ever one person talking, because there's still the lag problem. But when you're saying prayers along with even one person, there's community. Right.
So even though everybody else is on mute,
yes,
you're speaking in unison with one other speaker.
And you're looking at the screen and you're seeing people's mouths move. And that works. And because it's early in the morning, people don't want to get up and drive. Now, what we lose is the random people who wander in.
Right.
So again, there's swings and roundabouts, but a much more kind of effective and the thing about saying the office regularly is it's where you learn your Bible, it's where you do your sort of core developmental formation work, and there's twice as many people, maybe 3 times as many people who are able to do that in a small little parish.
That's amazing. One last thing I wanted to talk about. So in the work that I've been doing on institutional decay, one angle of sort of fixing the meaning crisis has come from this guy named John Vervaeke, and what he talks, he's a philosopher and cog-sci guy from Toronto, and he talks a lot about personal practices, right? Whether that's prayer practices, and he sort of lists out a bunch of them, which sound like things that we see in most religions, which are, contemplative practices, concentrative practices, embodiment practices, some level of ritualization of things. Like all of those things seem to be generative of meaning, and
it's almost like people have figured this out.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, and this is his whole thing. Like his whole thing is Neoplatonism and talking about like how like we've known this stuff for a long time. We've just forgotten it over and over and over again. And so I guess the question is, what do you think can be taken from the church experience for folks who may not be religious but are still seeking meaning and connection to the world?
That's tricky because there's I wonder a little bit if the underlying problem isn't already woven into the expectation there. Because when you look at all the big faith traditions that do this, and it's all of them, the sense of community is still at the core. So, to kind of go off on my own and get the book about how to do these things, right, and to sit in my living room and to do them, I think it'll work for some people, I'm sure, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the sort of sustainable piece. You know, there's, and this is also true in sort of every major faith tradition. It's what happens when you bump up against the thing that you disagree with, or the thing that's challenging, or that doesn't sit quite right with you, and that's the sort of encounter for change.
Right, but people are often what's required to have a meaningful thing. In, in Buddhism, it's the Sangha.
Right.
In Christianity, it's the congregation. Right, or the Bible study class. But like you said, almost every major tradition has some community component.
One of my mentors, a monk, actually said to me, so this was coming from somewhere real, he said, you know, it's not obedience until you don't like the answer. You know, what I would say is, pick something that's resonating with you. You know, find that community, and I mean, I think the kind of the missing piece is because another thing that we've seen, particularly with a lot of those pandemic communities, is that they're self-selected. They're people who like each other, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. I got friends myself.
Right.
But like, you know, I think there's going to be diminishing returns in terms of that. Finding that meaning when you're not really encountering the other, and it's actually what sits underneath the sacrament of marriage is, you know, there has to be difference, there has to be exchange. If I'm the same as you, we have nothing to give each other.
Right.
And I think you know, that's another element of the sort of atomization. You know, that when we do form these communities, they're not as rich as they were in previous situations. So, you know, what I would say is, you know, start with the book, start with the practices, see where that goes, see what's resonating with you. And another thing, but you know, it may actually be the tradition from the culture from which you come, because that's the one that's going to resonate with you.
You'll have the hooks already.
You'll have the hooks.
You'll know the mythology. You'll know the connections. You'll know where the hero's journey is in that story.
And even deeper than that, like pieces of worldview. So, like one of the contemplative practices within Christianity is Lectio Divina. It's this very structured reading of a text. And there's comparable practices in Islam and some other places. But you know, when you think about Western civilization, we're so wordy and so heady. And yet here's a contemplative mystical practice that taps into that predilection that's already present in our worldview. It's like, oh, okay. Like, so you may find it. You know, so that's what I would say is you know, find something and find a community that maybe you don't 100% agree with.
Love it. Well, thank you, Michael, for taking some time.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you.